Good evening, and welcome to the Miracle of Prosperity. I'm Reverend Jim Webb, and I serve as the Senior Minister of the Tacoma Metaphysical Chapel in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I'm the author of The Soul of Prosperity. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here this evening, and so I want to begin with our expanded awareness of prosperity by asking you a few questions. What type of prosperity do you desire? Do you desire relationship prosperity, where all your relationships are harmonious and reflective of the love and support that you deserve? Would you like professional prosperity, where your professional pursuits are rewarding and uplifting for you and for the world? Or in the words of Florence Scovel Shinn, you have a wonderful job with wonderful pay, where you provide a wonderful service in a wonderful way? Would you like emotional prosperity, where you experience the peace that passes all understanding, no matter what is going on around you? Would you like logistical prosperity, where your life just seems to work well and effortlessly? Would you like financial prosperity, where your finances are no longer a source of worry, but instead are a source of joy and expansiveness? Whatever the type of prosperity you desire, it is available to you. It is hiding in plain sight. And our task on the Miracle of Prosperity is to reveal the prosperity that you desire and allow you to reveal it for yourself as you realize that the blockages to it can be removed. So today we're going to work on a specific aspect of prosperity, financial prosperity, which is just as much a part of the prosperity equation as all other types of prosperity. And we are going to work on that with one of the key people in the New Thought movement who works with financial prosperity, and that is Reverend Joel Fotinos. Good evening, Reverend Joel.
Good evening. How are you, Reverend Jim?
I'm wonderful. And let me reintroduce Reverend Joel to you all. Some of you remember Reverend Joel from when he came to the chapel. I still remember how we did a processional to Diana Ross's I'm Coming Out, because it was all about shedding our fears and being who God meant for us to be. Reverend Joel Fotinos is so much more than a reverend. He's a successful business person. I know I'm going to get this wrong, but he's the vice president of Tarcher Penguin, which is the New Thought division of, I got it wrong, so you can correct me. He's also a father and an author, and he's the curator of the Napoleon Hill Think and Grow Rich series. He's done a number of books consistent with Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And you recall he did the Think and Grow Rich workbook, but he's done so many other books as well. So we want to welcome Reverend Joel Fotinos.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I'm so happy to be here with you.
I'm so glad you're here. And I want you to just take a moment with our viewers and just tell us how you got here, because yours is a wonderfully compelling story. And I'd like you to share that with our viewers.
Well, in terms of prosperity, I assume is what you mean.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was like a lot of people in this country and in the world, where I suddenly found myself filled with credit card debt. And at one point, I had 23 active credit cards with nearly $60,000 worth of credit card debt. And I'm sure people who are watching this and listening to this can relate. Some of them can. And I had to find my way out of that hole. And so I went to an accountant, and the accountant said, great news, if you just stop using your credit cards forever, you can get out of this financial hole in about 20 something years. And I thought, that is not good news. Actually, that's bad news. That sounds like the worst thing ever that I've ever heard.
Yes.
And so I began looking around, and I began reading materials, different books, which I would
Mhm.
charge on my credit card. And I would read them, and all of those books would say something in the introduction like, oh, and I want to give credit to a book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And then I'd read that in the
Mhm.
next one, and the next one, and next one. I thought, why am I not just reading that book instead of these
Yes.
books that are based on it or derivative of it? So I
Yes.
did. I found a copy of Think and Grow Rich and read it. And that, along with the New Thought teachings that I was studying at the time,
Mhm.
together, and then a few other books also, like Power of Your Subconscious Mind and As a Man Thinketh and The Science of Getting Rich and some others like that. But really, Napoleon Hill's teachings, because it was so organized, really changed my life. And so instead
Mm.
of 20 something, I can't remember what it was now, 26 years or something, um, I got out of debt in 3.5 years. And then my income started doubling, and it kept
Yes.
doubling, and it kept
Yes.
doubling.
Yes.
And and I found that I was doing the thing that Napoleon Hill talks about so much in his books, which was I was literally making money from my interests. And
Yes.
so that's so at a certain point, then I had a center in Manhattan. I co-founded and co-led a center in Manhattan. And I began teaching the principles because I figured if it worked for me and there are so many people in financial need, that
Mhm.
I'd love to teach the principles. And it just took off. And
Yes.
suddenly I was teaching the classes morning, noon, and night. And I taught, I don't know how many thousands of people directly.
Yes.
Then I did telephone back when, remember when we had the dial in telephone call classes, uh,
Yes.
uh, conference call classes,
Yes.
and then video conferences. And now my classes, my Think and Grow Rich classes are all through a company called Glidewing.
Mhm.
And so I've taught a lot of people. I've written a lot of books. I've
Mhm.
published a lot of books in the Napoleon Hill area.
Mhm.
And I just have to tell you, though, since we're in the New Thought Network, you know what's interesting to me, Reverend Jim, is that like outside of the New Thought world, people love Think and Grow Rich, and they really get it, and it
Mhm.
sells. This book was originally published in
19,
1937.
yeah, in the 30s. Yes.
Yes. I mean, it was
Yes.
published a year. Here's my current copy. It was published a year before the revised edition of Ernest Holmes' The Science of Mind. And if
Mhm.
you read those books side by side, they have a lot of the same language. I feel like
Yes.
they knew each other. Or if they
Either
didn't know each
physically
other,
or
they
spiritually. Yes.
spiritually, they definitely
Yes.
read each other. That's for sure.
Yes. Clearly,
And,
yes.
so, but in the New Thought movement,
Mhm.
there's this thing about it, I think, and
Yes.
I'm not sure what it is. For instance, one
Mhm.
time I was at a church, one of the
Mhm.
New Thought churches. I won't say which one and which
Yes.
denomination, but I was
Yes.
sitting there, and the minister saw me in
Mhm.
the audience, and
Yes.
it was at the beginning of the service, and he looked right at me, and a second later he said, "I just want you to know this is a church about love. It's not about any of that Think and Grow Rich BS. I don't know if I can cuss
Oh,
on here."
wow.
So, and he used the real word,
Uh-huh.
and then he said, "We're just about love. We're not about that Think and Grow Rich BS." And
Mhm.
I thought, wow, that's so weird to say. If you're about
Mhm.
love, first of all, you shouldn't be saying that. But then the other thing is later in the service, they
Yes.
made a special plea because they were broke. And then
What a
later
surprise.
after the service, I was talking to the minister,
Uh-huh.
and found
Yes.
out that the minister was also broke. And I thought, why
Uh-huh.
is there a separation between
Yes.
love and prosperity?
Yes.
And and I didn't get it, and I still don't get it. And so now when you talk to ministers, they will often mention prosperity books that are very spiritual, maybe
Hmm.
spiritually correct,
Hmm.
but they don't mention Think and Grow Rich. And yet Think and Grow Rich is the most new thought prosperity book
Yes.
on the market. And it's
Yes.
really interesting. And I love
Yes.
it. And, maybe I'm the only new thought minister out there teaching it, and that's okay
Mhm.
with me. But, and it works. And it works for me
It
and
worked for you?
so many
Yes.
other people.
Yes.
And I wish we could just bring it into the new thought world more than we do.
Yes. Well, it's very interesting that you mentioned what you mentioned about the separation between love and prosperity, because as I was teasing out my book, The Soul of Prosperity, you know how a book has a bunch of principles, but then they all move to the center of one key point? Well, the one key point of The Soul of Prosperity, which is a manual for creating your own prosperity, the one key point is that self love is the X factor of
Mm,
prosperity. And the energy of love is that which creates your prosperity. And you're right. There were people who thought that was quite radical. Now, I love how Think and Grow Rich is organized with the 13 principles.
yes.
And of the 13 principles, I have my favorite and the one that spoke most to me. But
Which
since
one?
this is, I'm going to ask you, show me yours and I'll show you mine.
Well, you know what? My favorite thing about there are 13 principles, and some I like more than others.
Yes.
And I like all of them. I mean,
If
truthfully,
you had to leave us with one that you wanted us to remember, which one would that be?
I think I would probably. I don't know if this is my favorite, but the one I would leave you with is the first one, desire,
Mhm.
because it really is the beginning point for prosperity, because he makes it very clear in there that if you're not clear about what you want, you're
Mhm.
not going to get anything. You're going to get something
Yes.
else. And in desire, he has uh, the basis of the Think and Grow Rich philosophy, which is creating what he calls the statement of desire. And
Hmm.
the statement of desire says what you want, what you're willing to give for what you want, because
Hmm.
you can't have something for nothing. He says
Right.
that. Ernest Holmes said that. The
It's
Fillmore
an
said it.
energy exchange and transformation.
Energy exchange. And then he
Yes.
says, when do you want it? Because we are great at saying
Someday.
someday. Yes.
Yes.
And so I like that. It's not my favorite of I mean,
Hmm.
I have two favorite
Hmm.
actions that he has us do, but I think that's the best one to start with.
Okay. I'm glad you only have one child because you passed the dad test, which is your favorite
I love
child?
them
I
all. I
really
love
don't
them
have
all.
a favorite.
I mean, my favorite is probably imagination,
Okay.
because I love imagination. My other
Yes.
favorite is probably decision, because that's such an important one. And my other favorite is the one that's called The Mystery of Sex Transmutation, which has such
Yes.
a weird title. And I keep thinking this came out in 1937. But what
Yeah.
he talks about is that energy that we have that,
Yes.
I mean, it's a powerful energy. And he says, you can
Sexuality is the energy of creation. The
absolutely. And
sacral
he says, you can
chakra
take
is the center for creating, and that is the sexual center.
the sexual
And
center and you can take that energy and use
yes,
it toward
yes,
what you want. And
yes,
it's incredible. That's so true. um,
it's so true.
he's not saying, he's not making a link between sex and what you want, just because that's where people's minds sometimes will go with that when I give classes. What he's saying is it's the energy,
It's the
the
energy of creation.
powerful energy,
Yes,
is the powerful energy you bring to the thing that it is that you want. So now I've shown you
absolutely.
mine. What's yours?
My favorite is the subconscious mind
Ah,
because what I found in my 30 years of working with people is that their unconscious mind often vetoes their conscious desires. And so, understanding their unconscious mind, their unconscious resistance, their backstories that say no when God is saying yes, and reconciling their unconscious with their conscious and healing their
yeah.
unconscious is uh, one of the key hurdles to overcome to allow the prosperity that exists
Yeah.
in plenitude. So that's my favorite. Now the other one, my second favorite, is the one that you've already talked about, sacred sexuality and sexuality as the energy of creation.
Yes.
And one of the things I noticed about that, and one of the reasons that I love it, is because when you have an orgasm, you are taking a brief shamanic journey. You are having an out of body experience. You are transcending your physical experience and knowing yourself as something so much more and connected to so much more. And when you know yourself as something that is so much more, and when you know yourself as connected to this great power, and you know this great power is surging through you, how can you not create with that the essence of your
Right.
desire? So that's my second favorite.
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at the 13 laws. I published many editions of Think and Grow Rich. This is one of my later ones. And I
Mhm.
put all 13 right just in the beginning, and I'm looking at it.
Yes,
And another great one is persistence, because,
yes,
you know, we human beings tend to be um, swayed by any bump in the road to get off
yes,
the path that we are
yes.
on toward the thing that we want.
Mm.
And,
Yes.
one of the, Reverend Jim, I just want to make this point, because one of the things I like so much about this form of abundance, and I think it's in your book as well, and it's in a few others,
Mhm,
and Napoleon Hill makes it so clear, is it's not about magic, and it's not about
mhm.
this idea that, hey, I just want it, so i'm gonna I'm gonna say it, and
Yeah.
poof,
And
it
then poof,
happens.
it happens.
It really is a process, and we have to be involved in the process. It has to
Yes,
be something that we involve ourselves in, because
yes.
the opposite of persistence is kind of like lackadaisicalness, I guess. I don't
Yes,
know if that's a word, but
yes.
sometimes I've noticed, especially in the New Thought world, and maybe this is why this book isn't as popular sometimes in certain New Thought circles, is that people
Mhm,
will say, I want it, I'm going to affirm it, and then they sit back.
mhm.
And what Napoleon Hill says is, I want it, I'm going to affirm it, now I'm going to take action. And that's
Yes,
a completely different energy. That's the
yes.
sex transmutation chapter energy. It's, I'm going to now go for it. I'm going to
Mhm,
step out of my comfort zone, and I'm
mhm.
going to live the vision that I want. Even if
Yes,
around me does not look like the vision I want, I'm going
yes.
to act as if, and I'm going to
Mhm.
take those actions toward. And so I
Yes,
like that chapter on persistence, because it is something that reminded me, and I know
yes.
from having taught so many people, that it reminds people that we have to be in it to win it. You have, that
Yes.
all those cliches are so true, that if
They're
you're not in the
cliches for a
game, you can't
reason.
win it. Yes, right.
Yes,
So
yes.
I just wanted to say that as well.
Absolutely. And what I tell my folks about that, and it's in The Soul of Prosperity, is when you hit the thing about New Thought people, especially when they have the magical thinking that they're going to just affirm it and poof, it's going to land on their living room sofa. Um, when you run into an obstacle, that is and this goes back to my favorite, the unconscious, the subconscious. When you
Yes.
run into an obstacle, it is just your unconscious showing up so that you can heal it, move through it. That's your inner no showing up so you can turn your inner no into the yes that God has already told you.
That's right.
And that's why persistence is so important for me, because we get it twisted. We think, oh, God said no. No, God didn't say no. You said no. This is
You said
God
no.
telling you, you said no.
Yeah.
And I'm saying yes.
Well, I think the very first story, if it's not the first, it's the second story in the book,
Yes.
Think and Grow Rich, is the story called 3 Feet from Gold,
Yes.
where the person is digging for gold, and then doesn't find it, and gives up and sells the land or the claim for a
Yes.
very little amount of money. And somebody comes in
Yes.
with just some more equipment, and just 3 feet later, they get the
Mm.
gold. And
Yes.
and the point is, if you had just stayed with it, you
Yes.
were so close. If you just
Exactly.
stayed with it.
Exactly. I do some channeled work, and the guides that I can't channel, the masters, they have a story that they love that's very similar. And that story is how we can, like, it's a football analogy, how we carry the ball from the opposing goal line, from the opposing infield, all the way to the 99th yard.
Yes.
And it seems like that final yard is just as long as the first 99, when in fact, if we carried it that far, getting that final yard is effortless. So
Yes.
don't drop the ball.
That's right.
Yes. So that's a wonderful piece of advice to share with everyone. Now, if you had one additional piece of advice to share with our viewers about prosperity and the Think and Grow Rich series, what would that be?
Let me see. If I had something else to say, what I would say is this, that something I like about Think and Grow Rich is it's not toxic positivity. It's not
Yes.
that idea that we just affirm things away. Um,
Mhm,
so I think it's important to acknowledge, and I
mhm,
hope that Napoleon Hill, if he were alive today, would acknowledge this, that not everybody starts at the same starting point,
mhm,
and not everybody has the same advantages that other people have.
mhm,
But everybody has same access to the laws of the universe.
mm,
And so wherever you are starting from, and I understand that there are inequalities, and I embrace that, and I get that very
mhm,
clearly. But I
mhm,
also understand that if one person can do something, then all people can do that same thing.
mhm,
And that the laws of life are available to each one of us wherever we are
mhm.
in our lives. So
Yes.
I think it is important to understand that we're not all starting from the same starting point, but I also think it's important to say we all have access to the same spiritual tools. So
Yes.
in our human lives, we may not have access to all the same advantages, but
Mhm,
spiritually we have the access to the same spiritual tools. And I want to encourage people to really dive into those spiritual tools, because
mhm,
it really will enrich their lives wherever they want. And as you said at the beginning of this broadcast, whatever kind of prosperity you want, whatever it
mhm.
is that you want, you have access to spiritual tools and laws that will help you to do that. And
Yes.
that's so great. That's the good news, you know. That's
Yes. And it reminds me of a book by Robert Mueller. And
yes,
the subtitle of that book was The Hidden Benefits of a Challenging Childhood and
yes,
the Legacy of the Heart. And it reminds me of a friend that I grew up with. And the friend that I grew up with was very, very advantaged, and I was not. And as our lives evolved and my life changed and took an arc towards success, and his life was, let's say, a little bit more stagnant, the tables turned a little bit because I had always envied him for his advantages. And one day he just looked at me and he said, Jim, you had it so rough, but I think that was good for you because it created this something about you, this fire in the belly. And I just never had that because things were so easy for me.
mm,
And that, to me, was just fascinating.
yeah,
And it just says we all have access to the same tools. Some of them may be uh, tools of position, tools of financial advantage, but there
yes.
are spiritual tools that we can all access to get to where God wills us to be, and that is in our place of peace and happiness.
I can tell you, when I was in all of that debt, I looked at
Hmm.
other people and I felt like they had tools that were not available to me. I
Hmm.
was a guy with from a not poor but a not rich background
Hmm.
in Western Nebraska. I didn't
Hmm.
know any of the Kennedys. I didn't go to any
Hmm.
fancy college. I didn't
Yeah.
know anybody famous, and
Uh-huh.
I was a hick, and I was not polished, and I was not in the know.
Uh-huh.
And so I always felt like other people had something I didn't have
Mm.
until I realized, and when I would read New Thought literature and I would read Think
Mhm.
and Grow Rich, it's
Mhm.
not, first of all, they didn't have access to any of that. And if you
Yes.
dug beneath their surface, I found
Yes.
out later, as a minister, you find out a lot of things. But
Yes.
the other thing I found out is that what I wanted really was already available within me. Now,
Yes.
if you had told me that back then, I would have said, that sounds great. Just send me a check
Yes.
because I'm broke. Just send
Uh-huh.
me a check. But
Uh-huh.
now on the other side of it, I think, oh, wow, it all was right there available. And
Mhm.
all I had to do was to do the things that um, were necessary for me to open myself up to accept it.
Yes.
It's so
Yes.
interesting how life works that
Yes.
way.
Absolutely. Click your heels 3 times and you are home. You've always had the power to get there.
There
You
it is.
just didn't know it.
Yes.
So I know that our guests would like some additional advice on how they can create their prosperity. So our guests have a chance to type in their questions, their comments, or the advice that they would like. And I know that you'll be kind enough, because I know you to be such a kind man, to share your advice for our guests on how they can achieve more prosperity.
Yeah.
So, my guests, if you want to type in your questions or the advice that you would like on how to experience more prosperity, Reverend Joel and I would be happy to support you in that. So take a moment as we go to break, type in your questions or your requests for advice, and we'll work with that after the break here on the New Thought Media Network. And we're back here on the Miracle of Prosperity with Reverend Joel Fotinos, author, curator of the Think and Grow Rich series, father, minister, motivational speaker, publisher, and so much more. We're so glad to have you, Reverend Joel. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Now, we have some questions from our members. And before we go to that, I want to drill down on something that you said that struck into what I think is a vein of gold information for our viewers. You mentioned that the Think and Grow Rich series is not toxic positivity. Now, much of the prosperity consciousness has gotten a bad rap as just being toxic positivity, as just being a bunch of affirmations, aphorisms, and cliches. And a lot of people think, well, I affirmed this 3 times and it didn't happen, so this is all BS. So a skeptic would say, if it's that easy, why isn't everybody rich? Why isn't everybody healthy? Why doesn't everybody have a joyful, peaceful, and fulfilling life? And what you tapped into was that it was more than that there was some inner work involved, the inner work of accessing the truth and activating the truth through our experiences and our spiritual practices. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. See, I didn't find it easy to go from where I was to where I wanted to be in those 3.5 years where I went from nearly $60,000 in credit card debt to just zero. That was my first goal, by the way, was zero.
Yes.
And because I was so far beneath zero that I just wanted to get to zero.
Uh-huh.
And it was not easy. It because I had to be part of it. And I think that there is sometimes in some New Thought circles, there's this kind of idea of just affirm it and believe it and poof, it'll happen. It's like in that movie.
Just throw up some fairy dust, spin around 3 times, and it'll land on your shoulders and everything will be different.
If you remember in that movie, The Secret, where the person stands outside the jewelry store looking at that necklace and then closes their eyes, and then it's like the necklace magically appears around their neck. It's like, who doesn't want that? I wanted that. But I had to become part of it. And one of the things that helped me a lot actually was this book, which you mentioned earlier, which it's this book, which is called The Game of Life and How to Play It by Florence Scovel Shinn, because I got this, and this actually ties into one of the questions from Rosemary. Can you talk more about your moment of inspiration, which allowed you to change your mind, your paradigm, your spiritual direction? So for me, I actually had one of those bottoming out moments where I realized I was paying Peter to, what is that saying?
Robbing Peter to pay Paul.
I was doing that with my bills every single month. And then, they kept sending me more credit cards and I kept using them, and finally one night I'd had a couple glasses of wine and I realized it, I got it. So I took my 23 active credit cards and I cut them up and I put them in a bag, and I went outside I was living in an apartment in Sausalito at the time, and I went and put them in the garbage can, came back in, the big apartment garbage cans, the big ones.
The big dumpsters.
And then I came back in and I was like, what have I just done? So I went back out to the garbage can. I actually went into the garbage can, those big ones. I had to climb
dumpster diving, that's a new low.
And I got that bag out and I pasted all of those credit cards because I couldn't imagine my life without them. But I knew that I had to make a change. And so I did. And I discovered that I couldn't use those credit cards anymore and get out of debt at the same time. Those two ideas were not congruent with each other. And it was so helpful for me to begin to align what I wanted with my actions and my principles, the things that I knew. So it wasn't easy. It wasn't something that was just simple out of the way. Toxic positivity will say, if it's hard, you're doing it the wrong way. Or they will say, everybody just should just automatically be rich or whatever.
Mhm.
And the truth is, we have to be in it. We have to give ourselves. Napoleon Hill
Mhm.
says 100 times in this book, and uh, it's also in The Science of Mind from Ernest Holmes, where
Yes.
they both do the same thing, which is you can't get something for nothing. As
Mhm.
you said, Reverend Jim, you have to energetically exchange something for it. And
Mhm.
also, you have to take action, and you have to take
Yes.
consistent action, and you have to
Yes.
stay with that action
Mhm.
until you begin to see things change. And then that's going to spur you on to make more action. So,
Yes. And I love what you said about hitting rock bottom and realizing core inconsistencies. And
yes,
I'm going to quote something that you probably have forgotten that you said, but it has stuck with me we met in 1998, 2008, and this has been 12 years now, 12, 14 years later. One of the things you stuck with
24 years.
Oh my. One of the things we neither of us is good at math, obviously. We better stick with money. We're not good at math.
Right.
Um, but one of the things you said with me then was you have to want what you desire
More than,
more than wanting to stay where you are.
yes.
And you just illustrated that with your rock bottom
Yeah.
experience, where you realized I want to be out of debt more than I want to stay comfortable robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yes.
And that paradigm shift where you realized that you wanted the new, the next, the better, more than the comfort of where you were, or even the
Yes.
discomfort of where
A-
you were,
And
was your tipping point.
what I forgot to say
Yes.
when I was tying in this book is
Mm-hmm.
that at that moment when
Mm-hmm.
when I realized that I was so depressed that
Uh-huh.
I couldn't use the credit cards because I was using them emotionally and in
Yes.
other ways,
Okay.
right? But
Yes.
suddenly I didn't have that anymore. And I thought,
Uh-huh.
oh, my life is about to change and I have to make these changes. How do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And this book says, make it a game.
Yes.
Don't make it a hardship, make it a
Mm.
game. And so I did.
Mhm.
And I
Yes.
tried to think of all the ways that I could make this a game. And so,
Mhm.
I used to back in those days when I was using the credit cards, I would use my credit cards to take all my friends out for dinner.
Mhm.
And then when I didn't have that anymore, it was like, well, what do I do now? And it's like, potlucks. I grew up in the
Yeah.
Midwest. We do potlucks. So it's
Yes.
like, why don't we have amazing potlucks where everybody brings one dish and we all
Yes.
come together? That was
Uh-huh.
fun. And then if
Mhm.
if I can't go out and buy things, what if we have a swap meet just of my friends where we all
Mhm.
bring 10 items that are really awesome that we don't want
Mm.
anymore together
Yes.
and then we can all choose from each other's stuff and
Mhm.
everything suddenly I discovered that every museum and every many places have free days, and
Mhm.
so instead of spending money, I was able to find ways to go to museums and things, movies in the park that were all for free, and I felt like the
Mhm.
richest person on the
Mm.
planet,
Yeah.
and it was so much fun.
Mm.
That 3.5 years
Mhm.
was a ball. I
Yes.
enjoyed it so much, and
Yes.
to the point where when I finally paid off my last bill and I had a big celebratory dinner, I
Mhm.
almost missed having debt because I
Yes.
had made it so much fun. I mean,
Yes.
not enough to get in debt, and I've never actually been in debt since, but,
Yes.
this is, the concept of making it a game is so
Yes.
powerful.
Absolutely. What it does is it takes away that forcing current that actually thwarts the creative energy. Because when you are in anxiety, when you are in doubt, when you are in fear, those are energies that are antithetical to the creative energy of love.
Right.
And that forcing current inhibits the flow of love that allows the flow of prosperity.
That's right. And
Yes,
by the way, when you're having fun with this,
yes,
because prior to that moment, I was not having fun. For
Yes.
years, I sweated it out, and I know
Mm-hmm.
people can relate to that. That's sweating it out
Yes.
of, how am I going to make it this month?
Yes.
How am I going to make it this week? And then sometimes, how
Mm-hmm.
am I going to make it today? And there were
Yes.
days when I would not eat things, or
Mm-hmm.
I would go to the grocery store and they would have those. I mean, this is back a little ways, where
Uh-huh.
you'd go to the grocery store and they'd have the mac and cheese boxes, not
Mm-hmm.
the craft version, but the store brand,
The store
and
brand
they would
version for
sell those for
23 cents.
23 cents, and every once in a while they would do it 10 for a dollar. So it
Uh-huh.
was 10 cents. And
Ah.
I would get 10 of those,
Mm.
and I would eat it, and I didn't have enough money for milk. So I would
Uh-huh.
just use, or the butter, because you could use
Uh-huh.
milk and butter with the packet. So I
Yes.
just used water,
Yes.
and it didn't matter. It was still tasted good. So, but I worried so much. And then when I turned it around and thought, oh, let me make this a game, everything changed. I reframed my problem
Mm-hmm.
into an opportunity. And Napoleon Hill says this several times. He's famous for saying this, in fact, in Think and Grow Rich, which is, um, um, I'm going to use it just exactly the way he says it. Oh, right, I have the thing on. Every adversity is, in reality, a blessing in disguise.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, was that true for me. And the
Yes.
other thing is, I ended up teaching, writing books, doing the video course, etc. I actually made more money
Mm-hmm.
talking about how to get out of debt than I did in any
Mm-hmm.
other thing in my life. And I think
Yes.
I look back and I think, wow, I never would have predicted that one.
Yes, that's so cool. And
Yeah.
that touches on the edge of another question that we had, which was actually someone who wrote in a question about how do I stop living on the edge? The edge financially, the edge as it relates to relationships. How do I stop that?
That's a great question. And I'm somebody who loves to live on the edge. I'm
Mm-hmm.
a double Leo. On the
Mm,
Enneagram, I'm a 7, which is the glutton, the epicure.
mm,
So I'm always
mhm.
looking for the way to game the system, right?
Yes.
And what I finally realized is the way for me out of it, off the edge, is to live sober. And I don't mean sober just in terms of alcohol. I mean sober in terms of finding the balance, so that
Mm,
I'm not going to the edge every time. So for me, I had to stop. Um, I was in credit card debt, so I had to stop
mhm,
debting with my credit cards. I had
mhm,
to stop. That was the
mhm.
first thing I had to do.
Cold turkey.
Cold turkey,
Mhm,
and I did. And there I
mhm,
um, So for me, living past the edge, I knew when I was in the edge. I loved being at the edge. So for me, when people say, "How do I get past living on the edge?" I say, "You already know how to live past that. It's to pull back on the thing that's
mm,
pushing you to the edge,
mhm,
because that's the thing that is maybe our blind spot, or the thing that
mm,
is going to take us away from what we really and truly want."
mm,
So I really and truly wanted financial
mm.
freedom. Okay.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
thought what would help me with financial freedom was if I were to get a check in the
Mhm,
mail magically for the exact
mhm,
amount that I was in debt, then I could just
mhm,
use that check, pay off my debt, and keep doing what I was doing. But then
mhm,
I realized I really, really got this, that
mhm,
if I were to move away from the edge, it means that I had to change my behavior in this
mhm.
area.
Yes.
So I did. And
Mm,
changing my behavior in this area, which was hard at first, till I
mhm,
turned it into a game. And
mhm,
then it became something exciting. So I found my new way of being. But that transition time took me a minute. It took me a
mhm.
minute. And
Yes.
that's what I talk when I talk about the toxic positivity. We don't
Mhm.
talk about that it's
Right.
sometimes can be difficult, and that we have to make difficult decisions, but
Right.
we have to, and
Mhm,
to align ourselves, because
mhm,
there is no spiritual principle in this universe that says you can have the greater but still have the lesser at the same time. We
mm,
have to be the greater to have the
Hmm.
greater. And we have to
Yes.
align those two things. And until we
Hmm.
do, we don't have it.
Beautiful, beautiful. And one of the things that, and this goes back to the skeptic question, one of the things that occurs to me is sometimes, and this also goes back to principle 12 about the unconscious mind. I wonder if sometimes we have baked it into our consciousness to get some sort of thrill out of being on the edge, some sort of
Yes,
sugar high, some sort of rush, or some comfort with that because that seems to be the norm. And getting back to something else that you said earlier, perhaps we need to want peace more. Perhaps we need to want to be in integrity more.
yes,
Perhaps we need to want to be settled more in that and making that choice. That there's a lesson in A Course in Miracles. The power of decision is my own. And perhaps we have to make that decision. I could see peace instead of this. I
yes,
could see joy instead of this. I could see balance instead of this. And that peace and that joy and that balance gives me just as much high because that is spiritual nutrition, as opposed to this sugar high where I might just crash off the other edge, the
right.
end of the edge.
Yeah.
And that's what comes to me around that.
Well, I will say sometimes for me, sometimes it was a habit that I had.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the things
Yes.
that took me to the edge that I
Yes.
didn't necessarily, I wasn't looking for an edge. It was a habit that I had that ended up being a
Yes.
bad habit. Other
Yes.
times, there were things that would take me to the edge
Mm-hmm.
because there was a thrill factor or an energy. That's what it is. It's
And
an
energy.
energy, a
Yes.
juice. But I
I like
realized
this
it wasn't
energy.
it wasn't the energy of what I wanted. It was
Mm-hmm.
an energy that kept me in my ego and humanness
Yes.
rather
Yes.
than align myself with the thing that I wanted. And
Yes.
actually, in that chapter we talked about earlier, the mystery of sex transmutation, Napoleon
Mm-hmm.
Hill talks about the fact that you can actually go around and you can cheat on your spouse as
Mm-hmm.
much as you want,
Mm-hmm.
or I mean, I'm not advocating that. He says that in the book. Or you
Yes.
can take that energy and use it towards something positive that you actually really want. And I
Yes.
thought, wow, 1937, how brave of
Mm-hmm.
him to say those things because,
Mm-hmm.
that he's saying that you can take this energy that we have
Mm-hmm.
and you can
Yes.
put it towards something that is not positive, that is
Mm-hmm.
something that is actually going to erode the things that you want: love,
Mm-hmm.
commitment, a
Right.
feeling of
Mhm.
safety, etc.
Yes.
And for a momentary thrill, or you can take that same energy that you have and apply it towards something that really is going to pay off for you in the short term, the medium term, and the
And the
long term.
long
And I
term.
love that so much because I love this idea that we have within ourselves all of this power and energy that we can apply. And every
Yes.
time I gave a sermon once when I talked about the fact that people say to me all the time in the thinking garage, oh, I got so much going on. I don't have any more energy for something more. And I talk about that
Mhm.
and I say, I
Yes.
used to feel that way. And then one day I was feeling that way going to work. And then
Mhm.
I saw somebody that was attractive and I
Mhm.
was like, oh, who's that? And I
Mhm.
rushed just to get another look and I rushed
Mhm.
to get up and I was like, oh, right. When we
Mhm.
have something we want, we
Yes.
suddenly have more energy for it.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that's why he says you have to find the thing that makes you want to
Mm.
make those extra steps so that you
Mhm.
go towards it and says, I want another look. I want to keep going towards it. I want to find
Yes.
it. And he
Yes.
says, small fires are small desires.
Mm.
So if your desire is not strong enough to keep you at it every day, your fire's too small.
Mm.
You got to have a bigger fire. You got to make
Mm.
it so much
Mm.
more powerful for yourself
Mm.
to really want to wake up every day and make that thing one step closer to reality. And the thing is there is no actual moment when you're like, now I have it and it's done, because we are the kind of creative human beings. We are created from a creative power
And we are a
who
creative engine constantly creating.
constantly creating, because our creator uses a creative process, we use a creative process. So
Yes.
as we get towards something and even to
Mm-hmm.
something, we're already on the next thing. So
Mm-hmm.
by the time I got to zero, my next goal was
Mm-hmm.
here. And then
Yes.
by the time I reached here, my next goal was already here. And I was
Yes.
already in the movement, but I
Yes.
had to start moving. I had
Yes.
to move first. We
Yes.
take action first. And I write about this in some of my books, where I always thought I'm going to wait until the energy was right. And I hear
Mm-mm.
that all the time, by the way, from people.
Mm-mm.
And then I got it that
Mm-hmm.
I had to take action, and then the energy started to flow.
Yes.
So energy follows action, not the other
Mm-hmm.
way. We don't
Yes.
wait to take action when an energy comes upon us. We
Yes.
have to take an action, then the energy flows. And that
Mm-hmm.
is a formula that literally changed my life.
Beautiful. And I want to put some of that in the context of A Course in Miracles and our own inner work towards prosperity as well. Um, when we are, and let me call all the things that give us a thrill, let's call that leaping for the golden ring that we see over there. When we are doing that, quite often we believe, because at core, at bottom, we all want love.
Yes.
And when we find ourselves doing like Reagan in The Exorcist for the golden ring that's over here, and getting on the edge to get to that golden ring, or living on the edge to get what we perceive to be that golden ring, it's a desire for love. But the question could be, is this a substitute for love?
Yes.
Is this an illusion? Have we been conditioned by our society to believe this thing will make me lovable? This thing will cause me to love
Yes.
myself. This thing outside of me is the source for love.
Yes.
And that's why quite often that's a sugar high, because we find out that we still have that yearning even if we got one of the brass rings. So, to put it in the context of A Course in Miracles, perhaps we have to want love from source, that connection with source, and that effortless flow more than we want to waste that energy chasing an illusion.
Yes.
And once we settle into the awareness that that love is an infinite supply, it is always available to each and every one of us, and we can connect with it easily and effortlessly. And it's not out there, it's in here.
Yes.
We will want that as the spiritual nutrition versus the sugar high of some other illusory brass ring. What do
Yes.
you think, Reverend Joel?
I agree with that. And in fact, it's something that I want to make a point of, and it goes back to the toxic positivity, because there's this idea that once you have riches, then you have made the thing that you want.
Right.
So I remember, just indulge me for 1 second. I remember years ago, I watched an interview with Madonna on
Mm-hmm.
TV, and
Mm-hmm.
Madonna arguably is, at least at that time, was the most famous person on the planet. And they
Yes.
said, "What is all this fame like?" And she said, "It's not what you think. Fame is not what you think, and it's not what you actually want."
Mm-hmm.
And people gave her a lot of
Mm-hmm.
hard times for that, because they'd say, "Well, you can say that because you have it."
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, right, she can say that
Mm-hmm.
because she has it. So
Mm-hmm.
with money and financial prosperity, what I've come to realize is
Mm-hmm.
it actually wasn't my original goal.
Right.
My original goal, to be honest, was to live more closely with spirit, to
Mm-hmm.
know that I'm always safe despite the circumstances, and
Yes.
to live a life of love. And
Mm-hmm.
I get so much more joy and benefit out of my
Mhm.
family than I ever did from anything in the bank. But I didn't know that when I didn't
Mhm.
have anything in the bank.
Right.
In
Exactly.
the Because I thought that was going to be the
Mhm.
thing that was going to bring me what I wanted. And it
Mhm.
actually, now on the other side, I can say it was great. There's nothing
Right.
wrong with it. In fact, I think
Mhm.
it's a good thing in this
Mhm.
life
Mhm.
to do that so that you can live more comfortably. But it's
Mhm.
not ultimately the ultimate goal that we each will have for
Absolutely. And
ourselves.
you know what I believe, Reverend Joel?
If it was, by the way, Elon Musk and people like that would just say, "Oh, I've got enough now," but they keep
Exactly.
trying to get more, and they're trying to
Exactly.
be
They're trying to fill a hole within by something without. Now, it's fascinating that you bring up Madonna because you know what I think, Reverend Joel? I think that obviously she was onto something. She realized that that wasn't even her goal. Perhaps the universe was giving her a worldwide platform so that she could become the spiritual teacher that she
right.
was intended to be in
Yes,
introducing the Kabbalah to the world.
the whole Ray of Life album, by the way, is
Exactly.
that way.
Exactly. The song Substitute for Love was what I was just preaching when we were talking about the other thing. It's on that Day and
Exactly.
Night album. So I think I hear music. That means that it's time for us to say our thank yous and goodbyes to Reverend Joel Fotinos. I'm so glad you were able to join us. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. And God bless you, Rafi, and your family.
Thank you
And
so much.
thank you for joining us once again. And everybody, thank you for joining us here on the Miracle of Prosperity on the New Thought Media Network. Good night.